Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reality Check Podcast. Tonight's topic: how education became indoctrination. Anyone that's paying any kind of attention to what's been going on in this country, especially those of us who went to school a few decades ago, back in the wonder years, uh, we know what's been going on and we know how the dumbing down of this country has been occurring. And tonight we will get into that. We will also get into the why, who's behind it, the many factors, because this really is a dumbass octopus with a lot of tentacles, and not one of them is much good at all. And you also see the pushback when somebody tries to change that, when somebody tries to resist. A lot of the times it comes from the teachers' unions. Uh, and the fact that I came from Cuba here is not that relevant, but more importantly is the fact that I went to grade school here beginning in 1962, right? JFK was still president. And right around when John Glenn made his first orbit on the Friendship 7, I was learning the language. It was awkward for me. There were certain sounds I couldn't pronounce, which is typical of any immigrant learning the language. But the things that we were taught in school, they were so different. You knew how to write in cursive even by third grade. You knew how to spell. It's interesting that my second language was English, but it soon became my first language. If I look at my old report cards, my mom saved them all. I had straight A's all through grade school, through sixth grade, in English and in spelling, straight A's, which a lot of native kids did not. American-born children did not. So obviously, whatever they were teaching, at least for me, it sure as hell worked on me. And then I'm going a little further forward. We had in the elementary school that I went to in Miami, it was called Rockway Elementary. We had, I started in fifth grade there because we moved right at the beginning of fifth grade. He was put in the class, and it seemed like the people around me weren't like, let me just say, the sharpest tools in the box. And then I found out that class was called 5D. This is interesting. Track through this with me. And I found out 5D, what does that mean? Is there like A, B, and C and D? D maybe is that, and there's like D for dumb. And then I was given a test, and immediately in a week or so, I was in 5C. A few weeks after that, I went to the office. You're always nervous about being sent to the principal's office, but they told me, no, no, it's just for another test. And all of a sudden, boom, welcome to 5A. Okay. You know who we met back then at 5A? Stephen Bauer. His real name is Esteban Echevarria.
Yeah, yeah,
Rocky
yeah,
from
yeah.
also USA. I sat next to him for most of fifth grade and a good part of sixth grade and later in high school. But anyway, um,
Stephen Bauer, the actor?
the actor, yeah, I know him
Okay.
since fifth grade. And then and we played trumpet in the band together too. But anyway, I don't want to digress.
Wasn't he in Scarface? Was he in
Yeah,
Yeah.
Scarface?
it was money. Yeah. And then playing off the success of that, he did a B movie called Thief of Hearts, which was actually he played. Remember where he changed his name? Bauer is his mother's maiden name, and also because he didn't want to be typecast as Julio, Paco, or Pedro, so he changed his name to Stephen Bauer, but it was actually it was mom's last name, and he did a movie called Thief of Hearts, and and his character's name, case in point, why he didn't want to be typecast was Scott Muller. Obviously not Manny Ray or whatever, but anyhow, suddenly in that class, it's like, damn, these people are much smarter. The teachers, they're teaching more difficult stuff. So what does that mean? They were using merit based. They were profiling. Oh my God. They were seeing this student's not too bright. Let's put him with the dummies. This one's in between, this one, so on and so forth. And thank God that they gave me those tests so I didn't languish in 5D. You know, I ended up in 5A. But I found that to be quite interesting. Can you imagine that today? It's racist. It's self-esteem hurting. It's elitist. It's white supremacy. It's whatever you want to call it. They'd be having a field day with that. So we were in fifth grade talking about King Constantine of Greece dying. We were talking about the Roman Empire. We were talking about Cincinnatus, one of the emperors. Okay, one of the officers. We were talking about the pyramids. We were talking about U.S. history in fifth and sixth grade. Can either of you guys or anyone in our audience imagine fifth graders today being taught something like that? I'm joined tonight, by the way, now that I got my rant out of the way, by It's Getting Hot and Humid in Alabama, Marcus, Florida too, by the way, and Raul Mice from Miami. Marcus, would you like to continue this topic of education?
Well, I think cultural Marxism infected pretty much everything. I look at cultural Marxism like mold or a cancer. Anything that comes in contact, it it uh, it 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 infects it. So whether it's entertainment, family values, the economy, sports, education, what it does, it twists logic, it twists analysis, it twists common sense. We could even look at COVID, how people respond to COVID. Wearing masks just to get into a restaurant, you could take it off to eat. What's the purpose of it? Just the common sense kind of threw out the window. And and I think like the reason why it became more of an indoctrination camp is because the ratio of liberal educators outnumber conservative teachers, and it's like 12 to 1 typically, and it could be depending on the science or the discipline, and it could be like as high as 44 to 1 based on science or discipline. Like if it's anthropology, sociology, they're all 44 to 1. And the thing is, there are teachers who respect uh, not injecting politics.
What is
Look
that?
at the numbers,
What are you
guys. Look
showing
at
us here?
look at liberals. Look at the graph. It was at least more of a 45 in the 60s. Sorry to interrupt. Look at it now. Disgusting.
What? I'm sorry. I couldn't make it. I mean, I could probably see some graphs that were widely divergent, but what do they show?
Because today, basically, in the real quick, in 1969, which is when this graph begins, it was 45% liberal, 25%, and about 27 and 27 moderate and conservative. Okay, so that's not too bad. It's like 2 to 1. Okay, now that's 1969. Right now, and from 21 to 22, it's 70%, or it's more, it's probably like 90 something, and only 14.9 or 10 conservative far right, 10%. So it's like 8 times the amount. And middle of the road, which to me is squishy Thomas Massey's that don't stand for any goddamn thing. But
All right.
the numbers, that's why it diverges. And that's the control. And, Marcus, please get into what brought about some of that incredible
Well, the
change.
thing is, as an educator, you're supposed to show a neutral based philosophy on teaching, but what's been known is the liberal bent of education. What they like to do is impart their philosophy, and over time, it what it does is provide like a cultural rot to the students. And there was a polling done on millennials, and it says like 70% would vote for a socialist, and 36% would vote for a communist.
And
And
violence for opposing speech. Violence to stop opposing speech.
well, this is just a candidate, and the thing is, it's like for the average person, we've been asleep in the wheel. We're too busy with work, with life, paying bills, maintaining a business, maintaining relationships. We've been asleep at the wheel, and then I think it became like an aha moment with Obama and Bernie Sanders, uh, where there was like a little bit of an awareness with the public. It's like Bernie Sanders making a lot of headway with a lot of students, and he's a known socialist. And then you kind of read between the lines with Obama. He professes cultural Marxism, and so that was a bit of a wake up call. And the what it, Obama becoming the president, he accelerated this cultural Marxism. There's a, a for there's a thing called Title IX, dealing with like sexism issues.
Women's sports.
I don't know if it's women's sports, but but it's about any allegations. And he lowered the threshold from like I think overwhelming or clear convincing standard to the preponderance. Preponderance is just 50% of the feather. So what that did, it allowed a big push towards DEI initiatives, where we have to promote inclusivity and 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 all this other stuff. So, but the thing is, there was no pushback by anybody, and that's like the weird part,
People are afraid to be called racist. They're afraid to be called homophobe, bigot, etc.
right?
That's where he fit. That's been Trump is defanging that pretty well.
So DEI became more entrenched into academia, and it's like a seed. Once you seed, it takes root, starts to flower and spread like a weed. And but there's other aspects of cultural Marxism. You got like feminism. You got Medicaid for all idea. You get the Green New Deal. You get this anti-capitalism philosophy. You got this anti-colonialist philosophy. You get replacement theory. You get forget what's that one? Critical race theory. You get replacement theory. It just you get this intersectionalism with like where Kajani that Supreme Court can't define what a woman is.
Yeah, like she doesn't know what a woman is. She was
Right.
more afraid of backlash from the extreme LGBTQ lobby that gives them a shitload of money. She knows goddamn well what a woman is. She's a
And,
woman, for Christ's sake.
and then like free speech becomes Orwellian to the point where it you get like conservative speakers, and there's a protest for their attendance at campuses where like Ahmadinejad was allowed at U of F to to be a guest speaker. So it just becomes like a weird surreal moment about things, and then eventually the pendulum, if it swings hard one way, it's going to swing back, and then what we see is a reaction to that. So you get like the mama bears, the Moms for Liberty in Virginia electing Glenn Youngkin. You get this DeSantis doing a pushback. You get the Supreme Court making a decision. We're kind of blind to the fact that there is no institutional racism, but we had institutional racism. We have race quotas. We like in education, and the Supreme Court struck it down on the Fourth Amendment, saying it's a aberration of instituting quotas when it should be like merit based. Taking the court taking a colorblind approach, where I forget what the ruling was, but it morphed into a race-based ideology, and then we're seeing that with the redistricting. Everything got turned up on its head. So
they're whining about the redistricting, but what they don't want to talk about is that was also fighting back on them taking illegals and counting them in the census. You do that, we're gonna gerrymander. Yeah, hell yeah.
So, but the thing is, it's like when you have like leftist professors expressing an ideology, what it also does, it stifle analysis, critical thinking. It becomes like indoctrination camps, and there's this common joke: the further along towards education, the more you become a liberal. And there's a running joke where Marxism thrives, especially in like a Harvard political science faculty department.
Well, these are people. Also, you mentioned Bernie and you mentioned Barack. Neither one worked a fucking day in their life. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the two of them in a little bit. Raul, what you went, unlike myself, that I went through the public school system, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to teach on your experience. I believe you went to parochial schools in Miami, right? As you grew up,
No, no, no,
you
no,
didn't.
no,
Where'd
no,
you go
not
to
at all.
school?
No, I was in the public school system up until I started ninth grade.
What,
Um,
what school?
I started at Dade Elementary, and then from there I went to Ponce de Leon, Ponce de Leon, as they say it in English, Ponce de Leon, the
Okay.
junior high school, and then I started high school at a Jesuit school, which is
And when
independent. It's not really part of the archdiocese, but three, well, two very different environments, from the public school system to going into a Jesuit school. But I want to sort of pivot the conversation just a little bit, because the title, how education became indoctrination, just kind of like pushes us back on that path of politics, right? I mean, we're making the assumption that, or we're saying that education today is really indoctrination. And I wanted the conversation, quite frankly, to be a little bit broader. I mean, it's how did education, and I don't disagree with you that there's been a lot of indoctrination. I think that's part of the problem. But I think it's a bigger problem than that. I think it's the fact that education, in many ways, is failing to educate, is failing to build a cohesive society, is failing to meet certain standards that we met in the past. I mean, um, and I think it has a lot more to do than just indoctrination, right? I mean, I remember when I was, small. I mean, it was back in the '60s when I first started going to grade school. It's a different time, a much different time than what we're living in today. For one thing, women were just starting to enter the workforce. Okay. The only jobs that women held in great numbers back in the '60s were teachers, okay, nurses, all right. But
Secretaries?
there were certain occupations that were traditionally filled by women, okay, and teaching was absolutely at the top of that list, at least in the primary and even secondary roles. I don't remember in my elementary schools ever having the only male teachers that we had, or male figures that we had in the school, was were the coaches, okay, um, and the custodians. That was it. The janitorial staff. Everybody else, every other teacher. I don't ever remember in first or second grade a man walking in and teaching me the alphabet. No, that was women, right? And because of that, and most of them were, I want to say, women in their 30s, most of them probably married, with their own families and stuff. And the whole environment was very different. It was much more of a nurturing environment. Okay. Um, there was a genuine interest in teaching us. Okay. Truth be told, I don't remember much about my first or second grade teachers. But man, I remember my third grade teacher, Mrs. Langford. Man, what an impression that woman made on me. Okay. Because like you, Carlos, I felt a little bit sort of, wait a second, I'm kind of the odd man out here. I'm Cuban, all these other people are, Americans, and I felt a little bit out of place. And Mrs. Langford, who was, born in the USA, I mean, she thought I was terrific, man. She really made me feel special. I became best friends, with a friend of mine who I'm still in touch with now, 60 years later. Okay. And he was not Latin. Okay. And I really started to integrate. But my point is that in all of this is it wasn't really until I got to high school and then beyond that in college when I started to see men in teaching roles, right? So historically, when I was growing up, women were the teachers, and they were the ones that were instilling, certain values, and they did it with. I mean, I tell people I had a wonderful childhood, man. I mean, I don't.
Same
I
here.
mean, had some bad experiences here and there, but by and large, man, I mean, I look back on my childhood and it was wonderful, right? And I had teachers that cared for me, and I had coaches that looked after me, and I had principals that would, call me in to exert a little bit of discipline when needed. Um, it was a pretty good environment, right? And I blame a lot of this is what's happened is not just the political fracturing of America and everything going to everybody going to one extreme or the other, but I think we've just seen massive societal changes because women um, started filling other roles, right? They were no longer you know pigeonholed into jobs as teachers or as nurses, okay? And men, especially men that have been hippies, suddenly discovered that, wow, you know what, I can teach now. It's okay for me to, if I'm feeling a little bit feminine, I can be a teacher. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to insinuate that male teachers are feminine or something, but I think there was a huge societal change, and I think but at least back then, you were taught there were certain things that you needed to master before you could go from one grade to the other. Okay. And like you, we always had some laggards, and you were put in a different, you were put in a different room or something to be caught up if you were a little bit slow on certain skills, you were given some remedial. But there were certain basic standards that you needed to meet before you could go from first to second, third, fourth. I mean, it wasn't automatic. I mean, there were some kids that were held back for a year or something. Um, and there was merit, right? I mean, you got grades, and they celebrated the kids that got the good grades, right? It was a big
Yes.
deal. And if you came home with a lousy report card, your parents would punish you. Okay, uh,
Yes.
what are you, an idiot? What's wrong with you, man? Why are you so why are you getting these bad grades? And you got to hunker down and all this type of stuff, right? That shit doesn't exist anymore from I'm told, or what I read, right? I mean, it's a much different environment. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No, but you're right. Marcus, please chime in.
Marcus. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, where education was more personal. I think there was a big shift when it became more institutionalized. That started with uh, Jimmy Carter developing the Department of Education, where uh, this funding required some compliance, and then you see like a slow degradation of standards. And whether it's Republican or Democrat, they're both uh, uh, blamed for, like George Bush with No Child Left Behind. Uh, it allowed where a child can fail. So what it did is you get a D or an F student going to the next grade, and they're dragging down other people because you're teaching at a certain level, but you get like a lot of people lagging behind who shouldn't really be into that class. And then you get like a thing called like Common Core, where teachers are more centric towards uh, having students pass a test and actually teaching them. Like Common Core math. I mean, I try to follow that, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
And then because it's a funding issue, you get a degradation of what type of classes to be taught. Like PE was like uh, a good way to instill uh, some some good character traits like teamwork and whatnot, but also like help with the fitness level because a good fitness ties to a good mind. And John F. Kennedy believed in that, so you have like a PE standard. And I remember watching a video called the LaSalle Standard in California. I don't know if you ever saw it, and you could go on YouTube, but you see like these uh, high school kids where it's almost like a Greek uh, 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 type of mindset about like physical fitness. You're color coded based on your physical standards, and it's like martial arts. You know, there's white belt and black belt, and you always get to the next level because you always look up to these people and you want to reach that standard. So what it did, it forced these students to excel in physical standards, and they're doing like crazy gymnastic stuff. It's like a 1960s footage, but what it did is it gave them like a good work ethic. It also everything ties into like physical health, like spiritual, mental, psychological. So it gave them a good mindset because when you have like a healthy body, you could apply to like a healthy mind. So when nowadays they're not even taking PE seriously or PE's left out of the equation, and you get like a lot of obese kids, and then you get like they're tied to the cell phone, they don't have the attention span, and then the lack of discipline, and then that's the thing about having sports, you create discipline as well. So I just wanted to impart upon that about how the sea change became gradual because of that level of institution.
I want to follow up on two things that were just said earlier, Rolo. You talked about friends that were American. We moved about every year or so because we were going to better and better houses, right? We didn't buy our first house until 5 years of being in the country. 66, we bought our first home, a modest 4-bedroom, two. Now, my first best friend was American. We lived there about a year and a half. My next best friend was American, across the street, year and change, almost two. My last best friend, and to this day, from 66 to now, is Irish American. Okay. And we are like brothers to this day. We've actually drifted very far apart politically, which doesn't matter. We still are brothers and best friends to the end. So that's one thing. And getting on what you're talking about, Marcus, with the physical fitness, the junior year I was in, we were so blessed to have a guy named Charles Bales, Coach Bales. He was like a drill sergeant, but a compassionate. That man was incredible. He built an obstacle course, literally built it with logs like telephone poles that were donated, a galvanized pipe. Amazing. He built an entire pegboard, monkey bars. Anyway, we had groups, and you talked about color. We had gold group, brown group, and white group. White group was like the not so fit, chubby guys that were not very, you know, athletic or coordinated. Brown group was a little better, and then the gold group were the guys that looked like the ones you described in a video. And it was based on things like how you could run. And remember, back then there was the presidential. We called it a presidential. It was 7 things like 600-yard dash, 100 meters, shuttle run, softball throw. I'm sure you guys remember that. But in seventh grade, okay, in this guy's class, he created. This guy was a forward thinker. This Coach Bales. He said, "I think there's a group that's in between brown and gold. Brown and gold were the colors of Rockaway Junior High, the Golden Falcons." So he said, "I'm going to make a blue group, and I am going to predict that the blue group maybe can't run quite as fast as the gold group, maybe not quite as far long jump, maybe not quite as many pull-ups, but we can beat them in sports." And by God, we did. Every sport we played, basketball, softball, flag football, wrestling, we volleyball, we beat them in every sport except maybe one. I think basketball maybe they beat us, but we beat them in every sport. So he was, in other words, he knew you could create a group of people. We were running, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There was a track, by the way, and a dirt track. They would kill the grass with oil, with motor oil, and was an oval, measured very specifically, very precisely in the schoolyard. We ran a mile on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Tuesday and Thursday, a mile and a half. And we didn't just run, he was in with a stopwatch, and they were keeping track of your time. We had to That's 6 miles a week. Can you guys imagine today a seventh grader, seventh, eighth, and ninth grader, but just seventh, running 6 miles a week? It's inconceivable. They'd be protesting. They'd say it's as cruel and unusual punishment. And by the way, indoctrination, Raul, getting back to the topic at hand, I'm reading a definition. Indoctrination is the process of teaching someone to accept a set of beliefs, ideologies, or opinions uncritically. That's important. That means unchallenged. The teacher says that America is a racist country and you don't get to challenge it. And I think a lot of why that's happened is because one of the master plans of the Marxists, and I begrudgingly say that one of the great victories that communism has won is infiltrating our education system, because they know that you get a young mind and you're teaching them
But what I'm getting at, Carlos, is I don't buy the shtick that it's all a communist revolution that's destroyed education. Okay, I mean I don't disagree that that there are a lot of leftists in the schools, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there have been an enormous amount of societal. I mean, the communists didn't open women into the workforce, right? I mean, they didn't. That wasn't a communist conspiracy to get women to stop being mothers and parents and start entering the workforce, right?
That's economics.
Huh?
That's economics.
I mean, look, the point that I'm trying to make is that it wasn't that there's been a lot of changes in society, and that the conversation that I'm trying to sort of have here is the problem isn't just indoctrination, okay? The problem is much lower educational standards, okay? The problem is some of the things you've alluded to. We no longer teach physical education in kids. It makes people lazy, okay? It leads to obesity, right? I mean, the United States, the military has an enormous problem because recruiting kids, because there's so much obesity in schools today. That was kind of unheard of when we were growing up. There was maybe one fat kid in the entire school or in the in the class or so, but it wasn't the prevalence that we have today, right? And a lot of things started to change, in the late 60s and early 70s. And Marcus, you mentioned it as well. We had a couple of changes. The creation of the Department of Education, I think, was a huge mistake, because education used to be locally focused, right? And by the way, I forgot to mention, yeah, I had a very pleasant childhood, but the reason I stopped going to public schools is because my nice, tranquil public school environment was completely upended when they decided to end, the segregation in elementary schools. And one morning I woke up and there were, busloads of black kids coming in from Coconut Grove to be integrated into our school, and fights broke out. I mean, it was like, there was just, our environment, the people that we were comfortable with, suddenly you bust in a bunch of strangers, forget about the skin color, just people that we didn't know, right? And now it's like, okay, you guys all have to get together and get along. And guess what? We didn't. And I would come home all beat up and, from fights and this and that. And my mother finally put her foot down and said, no, we're pulling him out of public schools, because this whole idea, and really, if you think about it, it's kind of cruel, right? Because you've got children that are in a particular environment, and literally from one year to the next, boom, all those classrooms got blown up, and white kids got sent to black schools, and black kids got sent to white schools, and everything got upended just because somebody decided, wait a second, this is bad, okay, and we have to change it, and we have to change it right away, okay? I don't think it actually went that way. I mean, I think there was probably a lot of resistance. I know there was a lot of resistance,
yeah.
But finally the judges cracked down and said, no, you are going to desegregate. You're going to, desegregate the schools, right? So that started the chaos. And I think, quite frankly, and I'm a firm believer in this. I mean, I kid about it a lot, but I think that whole generation of the older, when I was in the 60s, the hippies, seeing these young kids getting into marijuana, protesting the war, doing even harder drugs, LSD and all that stuff. Those are that generation of the hippies are the ones that never wanted to leave college because they were, enamored with the free sex and marijuana and all this shit. And they decided we're just going to stay here and get PhDs and continue doing this shit. And they're the ones that basically instigated this whole educational mess, in my humble opinion. They lit the fire, if you will. Okay. I believe that quite firmly, man, because it's like the 70s, that's what it was all about, man. Peace, love, do whatever the hell you do.
Vietnam War was a big catalyst too.
Yeah, and Vietnam War, and screw the man, and the government, and everybody's out to get you. And I mean that whole cultural mess in America really screwed up a lot of people, and I think it set the tone for a lot of changes taking place. That really started the deterioration, right? But I think generally speaking, okay, I don't know when the problem. I mean, I think things have gotten really bad at the turn of the century, and now, these last 20 years and stuff. I mean, things have just gotten insane, okay, because we have sort of, for a variety of different reasons, right? I mean, and I think we've talked about this in other programs, right? When we were growing up, and up until the mid 90s, maybe, okay, we had 3 major television stations in America: ABC, CBS, and NBC. That was it. And you had
Don't forget PBS. Don't forget PBS.
PBS. Nobody was, but everybody would sit down, okay, at the end of the day, and you'd either be watching Walter Cronkite or David Brinkley or whoever the other person was. There was like talking heads who would tell you the news, and you only got that information thrown at you at the end of the day. You weren't constantly being bombarded with news throughout the entire day, right? People didn't talk about the news all day long. They didn't talk about politics all day long. They didn't talk about what's going on with the war all day long. Okay, people got up, they made breakfast, okay, got the morning newspaper, scanned the headlines, but then you tucked it under your arm or something to take it with you to your office, get in your car, commute, because you got to be at work, man. You got to be there by 8:30, 9 o'clock. Okay, there was a certain regimentation, and you had to be there. Okay. And when you got to work, there was no reading the newspaper and chit-chatting, and there was maybe the water cooler. That's where the people would go to gossip. Every couple hours when you had a break or something. Okay, but it was a different environment altogether. Okay, and I'm not saying that we need to go back to that. Okay, but what I'm trying to get at is that so many of these changes, including technology, including the internet, this vast array of information that we're getting, and this thing, man. I mean, this thing, like you're alluding to, this thing has dumbed down America, right? I mean, I go out to walk my dog in this neighborhood, and everybody's walking around doing this. They're all walking around. They got the dog in one hand. They're not even looking up at you. They don't even bother to say good morning, how are you? Everybody's just walking their respective dog, or they got the earbuds in. They're like zombies, right? I mean, you say good morning to them, and they don't even acknowledge you because you realize that their ears are plugged up and they're listening to some shit, in their ears, right? So why the fuck bother? Why do you even bother fucking going outside? Why don't you just exercise at home or some shit like that?
Well, look at kids in the yard. Growing up, you get a bunch of kids in the neighborhood playing football, or baseball. Now everybody just playing computer games inside.
Yeah, man. And remember, listen, and it was, I mean, you think about it now, I think we talked about this last segment, right? I mean, somebody was talking about this, about, how parents had to go out and look for their kids because they were still out playing. You didn't want to come home. You were having so much fun with your friends, playing around the neighborhood, whatever, okay? And, your mom would have to come and drag you back into the house, or, in my case, tell my brother, hey, go get Raulito out of the park and bring him home. It's time for dinner. He's still out there, comiendo mierda, so bring them back home, that type of shit.
For you English, comiendo mierda, literally eating shit. That means farting around.
Yeah, exactly, man. I was playing whatever, So, look, every society changes, right? I mean, this is called progress, supposedly. I don't know if it's that much progress, right? I think people are starting to wake up, and I'm seeing more and more schools now saying when the kids, come into the day, this shit gets put away in a locker, and you don't get it until lunchtime. For half an hour maybe, and then you got to put it back in. You got to turn it back in again, and we go back because I think people are realizing that we need that regimentation, okay, to teach kids, schools, to get them away from this. And the reason this, the reason I suggested this topic for the conversation tonight was because I saw this. I think I sent it to you guys. This fascinating video of a neuroscientist talking about how the SAT test that used to be, the reading comprehension test and the SAT was an essay that you used to have to read that was 350 words long, okay? And then you had to answer a bunch of questions that required you to infer from what you read in those 350 pages and reach to some conclusions about what you read in that 350 words. That has apparently now been replaced by a series of short essays, no more than a couple of sentences, okay, where the reading comprehension doesn't require you to infer, in other words, to take one thing and infer something from it because of this and come to its logical conclusion. No, it's just you read 3 or 4 sentences and you're asked to identify one or two truthful things in that 2 or 3 sentences, right? It's completely dumbed down. There is no comprehension. It's just, and why are they doing that? Because the kids today, they don't friggin' read because they just sit there scrolling through, and laughing and giggling and playing games and doing a lot. I mean, I don't travel anywhere near as much as I used to a long time ago. But man, when I get to an airport, it's just hilarious to see people how everybody's just like zombies, walking through, looking at their phones or getting on the planes, and even on the plane, just the whole thing, that they don't even have movies anymore, right? Before, they have a movie and they had to shut up, and that's what you did. You at least watched the movie, put on some earphones or something, you'd watch a movie, people would laugh, Now everybody's in their own little bubble, that one little seat that they're in, that's it, and you can't interfere or touch them or whatever because everybody's in their own bubble. In my mind, I'm kind of glad that I'm getting old, and I'm kind of glad that I'm not going to be around for another. I mean, I love my grandkids. I'd love to see them grow up, but this shit don't fly with me anymore, man. I'm kind of glad that I'm not going to be around to see the zombification of America continue.
Idiocracy.
Well, the rest of the left still hanging, by the way, the big three, Uncle Walter and whatever, Glenn Brokaw. Imagine if the left still had the information monopoly they had then we'd really be screwed. And by the way, what you said about teachers, in my case, it was similar as far as males, females. The male teachers started to appear like in about 5th grade, mostly 5th grade on. And then we had a pretty even mix. So my experience is a little different. Here's another thing, okay? I went to dental school in the 80s, right here in America anyway. And it was about 80-20. And by that, I mean 80% of the 120 students from USC were men, 20% women. Today, fast forward, you go to a dental school graduation, it's about 50-50, maybe a little more. We're seeing something else that you didn't see before. Women now, a significant amount of women are married to a bunch of lightweights that they earn more than the guy and they're carrying them. And that's, again, part of the castration of society, all in the name of killing toxic masculinity. Maybe I'm a male chauvinist pig. I'm an elitist. I'm whatever you want to call me, a troglodyte. But I think when you're a guy, and unless the woman is a celebrity, I understand you're not going to make the kind of money that an actress or someone makes, or a CEO. But if you're an average guy with an average job and the woman you're with makes more than you do, I don't know that I mean, maybe again, my limitation, maybe my prejudice, I'd have a hard time with that. Again, that's just me. Marcus, I know you want to chime in.
No, it's about uh, Carlos making about, no, not Carlos, but Raul making about inferences. Uh, there was a YouTube video about this a young black man who who graduated or is about to graduate high school, and he was interviewing his fellow high school students, and he was making inferences based on a sentence, and they couldn't even do that. They couldn't make any inferences. So,
Well,
like for like a long essay down to a short essay, it's but these were like uh, a few sentences, and they can't draw inferences, and that was wild. And another thing is education has been cheapened so much that getting a high school diploma, which was a big deal back in the 40s or 50s or even 60s, is not a big deal now. Having a bachelor's is not a big deal. You look at AOC with an economics degree, and I have like 3 masters. Not to brag, but I've seen it. Having gone through 3 different schools, I've seen it more as a legalized diploma mill because uh, you have professors being pressured to pass mediocre students doing mediocre performances because I got a chance to review you as a grad student. You review each other's work, and I'm like bleeding red on some of these people. Like they're doing crap critical review essays, and I'm like, but they're passing. The professors are passing these people who are getting like maybe a B minus or a B because that's the minimum when they should be getting like a D plus. And it's like, but it's cheapening uh, the paper that you put on the wall.
well, example, and you're talking about academia in general. Dental school. When we graduated, we had to do probably 4 to 5 times without getting into weeds, procedure by procedure. The number of procedures checked, signed off, and approved, and they had to be reviewed by the department head of each department, or endodontics, periodontics, whatever. We had to submit that, or we did not graduate. We did not graduate. And we had to have a certain number of clinic points. Today, they come out with a pittance by comparison. And that is why those students come out and end up working for Sage, for Aspen, what I call them dentists because they're scared shitless. They don't have the experience. They don't have the patient management skills. They don't have the people skills to properly compete. Today the young dentist that's going to aspire to have his own practice it's a small minority. They are going to be employees for life. Who wants to sacrifice between college and dental school 8 years of your life, 8 years post secondary, to be an employee of a clinic and have some asshole manager browbeating you, looking over your shoulder and telling you what you have to do. Uh, to me,
Well,
that idea would have been ludicrous, but today that's more the exception than the rule.
look at the cheapening of education. You also have like professional standards. The black kid who stabbed this white guy at a sporting event. His twin brother saw him fatally stabbed in the heart. They're allowing that black kid to graduate high school.
Well, isn't that on trial? Has it even tried yet?
No, I don't think he's gone to court yet.
And I'm
But
wondering, in a state like Texas, why has he not gone to court?
it's going through the legal process. Everything's
Yeah,
slow. I mean, you commit murder, you go to trial like 2 years later. But the fact of the matter is, I'm sure he's a poor performing student, but as a poor performer who committed murder, he's allowed to graduate.
yeah, yeah.
And then it cheapens the high school diploma.
Yeah, yes, it is.
You know, Marcus, a lot of what you're alluding to, man, and getting back to the damage that the federal government has caused in our society. It wasn't just with the Department of Education, right? It was also the Great Society, these welfare programs
Yep.
that we poured money. We the government took this attitude that, we're going to eliminate poverty in America.
War on poverty.
And the best way to do that was to flood these poor neighborhoods with, food stamps and free housing and all of these things, and this has, been talked about a lot. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. I mean, you can look it up. I mean, but what a lot of those welfare programs did is, it incentivized poor women to have more kids, because the more kids you had, the more money you got from the government. Okay, and it lessened their dependence on having father figures or having one husband. Okay, and a lot of arguments have been made that those programs really exacerbated the poverty rather than fix it. Okay, and it created this, that eventually led to more and more crime and gang warfare and stuff in these inner cities, because the role models, the fathers, no longer could control the kids, and they weren't around. They didn't have to be, because they weren't needed anymore. So a lot of that was caused by these social welfare programs that really, rather than lift people up, just kept them down for a much longer period of time, right? And it didn't work. It didn't work. A lot of these things that we thought we were doing in order to better our society, in fact, kept people down for the longest time, right? So, and I think now, thankfully, I think we've overcome a lot of that stuff. But now we're facing these other challenges, and we're having to play catch up. If we really want to, think about how we do a better job with our children, and with our just turning people into good citizens, good people that have certain ethical standards, right? No, everything is not about feeling good. Everything is not about everybody's not okay. You can't not put in the work and expect to get the same reward, right? And the other big mistake, quite frankly, and you're talking about how these people, why did universities become diploma mills? Because we had this obsession, I think, with everybody's got to go to college, right? I mean, it's like the mark of success where that you go to college. Well, guess what? Not everybody's is geared up for going to college. Okay, and this is where I'm a big fan of Mike Rao, right? The dirty jobs guy. This country needs a lot of blue collar people. There's nothing wrong with being a plumber, a welder, an electrician. Make good money. Those are necessary jobs. Those are skilled trades, okay? And they are just as valuable and just as productive in society as somebody who's got a 4-year degree or several masters or a PhD or whatever, right?
Schools took away carpentry, high schools.
Rahul, let me ask you this: regardless of the more women now in the teaching workforce, do you think the fact that, and this is why I say it's Marxism and political, the fact that there's maybe 5%, whatever, 10% conservative to 90% liberal, that's not an accident. That is engineered. That is made that way. That is where it becomes indoctrination. And you can't.
I don't know, man. I grew up in an environment where men didn't become teachers. I'm sorry. It was not something that was highly regarded, right? I mean, maybe if you were really bright and you got a PhD, you'd be a professor at a college, with a corncob pipe and a tweed jacket with corduroy on, patches, leather patches or whatever. That was respectable, okay? But teachers was kind of like something that women did, right? I mean, they that was part of their DNA, that and nursing and stuff, right? Men went out there and we built things, and we worked at a job, and whether it was I mean, look at Leave It to Beaver, right? Remember the old Leave It to Beaver? The guy, I think, was like an insurance salesman, right? And his wife was always impeccably dressed, and she had the white pearls. I mean, and she was always, getting ready to cook dinner for when her man came home, and he always showed up in a suit and, had the newspaper under his arm, which he take it to work with him, and he was tired, and the wife would give him a drink and blah blah blah, and it was that environment. It really was. It was a completely different world, right? And now you look at that stuff, and I mean, it's almost like comical, right? But that society had certain morals, right? Certain mores, if you will, certain structures that, people tried to conform to, and that you realize that, yes, you could do this, but you couldn't go that far. I mean, you had to draw between the lines, okay? And the hippies blew all that shit out of the water. They're like, no, women can work, and why do women have to wear bras, and why can't we smoke pot, and why can't we do LSD, and all this shit, and Woodstock, and let's go and dance naked in the pools and all that stuff, and all of this. I mean, I remember it was like a shock, watching this stuff, saying, wow, man, look at what's going on here, man. These people are totally like nonconformists. And I'm convinced that all those nonconformists, which were called hippies back then, are the ones that ended up deciding, well, we're going to stick around universities because this is kind of a cool gig here, right? I mean, we just show up, a couple hours a day, we teach, we have a teaching assistant to grade the report cards for us. And, they took over the schools, and then, yes, the unions, look, the only place, and I keep reminding people of this, the only places in America where unions truly exist in great numbers are in the public sector and in schools and universities. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure, we still have the Teamsters, there's some certain, unions that are still out there that are powerful, but unions are by and large a thing of the past in America, except for, okay, colleges, universities, and the public sector, municipal jobs, firemen, policemen,
employees,
government, the American, American government, the Employees Association, ACME, whatever it's called,
AFG,
USA.
And think about it, it's kind of insane, right? Because unions were set up to compete, okay, to allow workers to have power over big, powerful businesses that constrain their wages, okay? And now you have unions that are not confronting big businesses anymore, but now they're basically making sure that public employees can't be fired, making sure that teachers can't be fired, okay? That's what has happened, okay? I mean, the unions are now protecting government employees and teachers rather than, guys on a factory floor. Yes, I mean, Ford has some, but, Ford's not what it used to be. GM is not what it used to be, right? I mean, we've gotten rid of so many of those jobs by now, and so many have been replaced with automation. It's a completely different workforce. We have a workforce now that is heavily focused on the service sector rather than manufacturing, okay? We don't have people building stuff as much as we used to in the past, or manufacturing stuff. Hopefully that will change. I think that'll be a good change for America, quite frankly.
Marcus, go ahead.
Raul touched upon it. I think one aspect that is kind of deliberating is with education, there's no sense of consequence. It's like no matter what I do, I'm gonna pass. I'm gonna graduate, and then, but what it does, it gives them a very poor value system that it's brought up into the real world, like in terms of how they work or how do they get on with life. They just they become mediocre because there's no challenge, there's no risk of failing. They get participation awards.
Yeah, they didn't have that either. We're going to start wrapping things up, everybody, and I want to end with my parting thought, then go clockwise. I guarantee you that the other night, those hoodlums, those animals that you saw in the Chipotle throwing shit around, people that were there terrified with their kids in DC, not a damn one of them comes from a two-parent household, which touches on what Raul was talking about earlier. Dr. Walter Williams, who was a black professor of economics at George Mason, I believe, University, he said famously, it's amazing how the black nuclear family survived slavery, survived the
Yeah.
KKK, survived Jim Crow, only to be destroyed by LBJ's Great Society and War on Poverty.
Yeah.
So that, and one last thing, we're talking about these employees. Workers of the world unite. All of this has Marxist tendencies. Marxist ideology always imposes itself with teachers and with unions. That's just history, whether it's in Russia,
No, no, no.
whether it's in Cuba, whether it's in the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc. Marcus, so that's it for me tonight. You go ahead, and then I'll wrap us up after all.
Well, I like the what you guys should check out LaSalle, like a PE program back in the '60s. It's a completely, I mean, they look like Greek gods and goddesses.
Yeah, no,
But,
I'm gonna check
but,
it out.
but the thing is, it kind of ties into me coming from the military. Is that going into a rigid structure? I was kind of semi-feral in outlook, but it would allow me the opportunity to have like a father figure of sorts, being in the military, and I think a good way to kind of reorientate society instead of instituting like a draft is like I said, we like the schools lost PE, they lost carpentry or any vocational stuff.
right.
So a good way to turn around is to reinstitute those, but to have like ROTC as part of requirement to graduate. Like, in your junior and senior year, everyone participate in ROTC because then they know about structure, they know about consequence, they know about rules. When you're graduating without a rules-based system, you're going to have like a feral outlook in society, and then you're going to get government dependency as well. You're going to come off as not a producer, but as a welfare recipient.
Paper, not a maker. Raul.
No, listen, Marcus, as I'm hearing you talk about this, I remember, the gym, man, the gym classes were, and the, presidential fitness test, right? I mean, those were all like, stuff we had to do. And, I remember, at one point, during the gym classes, we had those hemp ropes, from the ceiling that were like 20, 25 feet high. Okay. And you literally had to climb them up. All right. And if you fell, there was maybe like a 4-inch pad of foam rubber and the coach that would sort of break your fall on the way down. Okay. But, everybody had, you had to sort of climb up there. You were expected to climb all the way up to the top of the rope, and, and people would cheer you on. And then the other thing that I saw somebody post about the other day, which I thought was hilarious. Remember when they gave everybody those like big, hard, round rubber balls, okay? And they split you up into one group and the other. And it was just like, kill the other guy with a rubber ball. What was the name of that?
Dodgeball.
Dodgeball, right? And that stuff like hurt, man, when you got hit with it, right?
But it was fun.
But it was a lot of fun, and it allowed, think about this, man. I mean, it allowed people to sort of get whatever anger and hostility they had in them, and those hormones of young boys and girls, right? Boom, 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 boom. And you kind of like, you felt better afterwards, right? I mean, even if you got hit a few times, right? You came out of that saying, boy, that was fun. Yeah, I got whacked, but man, I got back at you, and I got back at this guy, and that guy really got on my nerves, and I chased him down, and boom, I got him, and it kind of like kept things in order, right? Because you had this sort of moments during gym class where it was okay to be uncivilized and burn off some of that energy, and and it allowed the rest of the day to sort of go on, and you'd go back to your classrooms and you'd sit there and you'd be kind of burned out from exercising. So you'd be like chilled and you'd be listening to what the teacher was saying, and and you had recess time and different activities. It was different, man. I mean, it's we've lost that, unfortunately. I think we need to go back to it.
That needs to be clawed back. And we had a senior that wanted to wrestle me. He was obsessed with pinning me, and that day we were like the fifth in a row because every day there was only time for a certain number of matches. That day he grabbed me by the hand, walked me over to the coach, and he said, "Coach, I want to wrestle him." This guy was a year older than me, and the coach says, "Okay, fine, we're gonna jump the order. Go wrestle." I pinned him in like 35 seconds. The guy was humiliated as shit. When we went in the locker room, he goes, I could totally annihilate you with street fighting. I just said, "Hey, whenever you want, I'm here, okay? Just shut the fuck up already." It never happened. So anyway, it's been an interesting set of topics tonight, and yeah, our education is in trouble, and yeah, we need to claw it back. When I see universities like Mizzou after that nut job redhead professor to push out that poor student that was filming, remember that? She got fired. You know what happened to Mizzou after that? They didn't close 7 dorms. They closed 7 towers. 7 dormitory towers were closed because of lack. The SEC is seeing a boom in application. The Ivy League is leaking people. So there is hope. And with that, I want to bid all of you good night, and like and subscribe if you like what you saw. Until we have our next episode in a couple of weeks. Thank you.